Have you ever heard of a time when an entire nation was forced to forget its own history? A time when millions of stories were deliberately erased, buried under a thick blanket of fear and propaganda. This isn't a dystopian novel. It's the real story of the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin, and how the memory of one of the darkest chapters in human history, the Great Terror, was systematically suppressed. Let's rewind to the 1930s. The Soviet Union was in the grip of what historians now call the Great Terror. It was a brutal campaign of political repression, orchestrated by Stalin. The scale is almost incomprehensible. We're talking about a vast network of secret police, show trials, and the infamous Gulag labor camps. But what's truly chilling is how the truth was hidden. Imagine living in a world where your neighbor, your friend, or even a family member could just disappear overnight. They'd be arrested in the dead of night, accused of being an enemy of the people, and you would never hear from them again. And the worst part? You weren't allowed to ask why. You weren't allowed to mourn. You weren't even allowed to acknowledge they ever existed. Their names were struck from records, their photos were doctored, and their stories were silenced. The state controlled every piece of information. Newspapers, radio, books, they all painted a picture of a thriving socialist paradise, completely ignoring the millions who were being arrested, executed, or worked to death in the brutal conditions of the Gulag. The official narrative was simple and absolute. There were no mass arrests, only the just punishment of a few traitors and spies. The Gulag system, a sprawling archipelago of forced labor camps that stretched across the vast Soviet territory, was portrayed as a re-education system for criminals, not a death sentence for political prisoners. For decades, the true number of victims remained a state secret. How many were arrested? How many died? The world, and more importantly, the Soviet people themselves, simply didn't know. The silence was deafening, enforced by the very real threat that anyone who spoke out would be next. It wasn't until the late 1980s, during Mikhail Gorbachev's policy of glasnost, or openness, that the veil began to lift. Archives were slowly opened, and the horrifying truth started to trickle out. Memorial societies began to form, like the famous organization Memorial, dedicated to documenting the crimes of the Stalinist era and honoring the victims. For the first time, people could publicly mourn their lost loved ones and piece together the fragmented history that had been stolen from them. It was a painful, but necessary, national reckoning. However, this process of remembering has not been a straight line. In recent years, especially in modern Russia, we've seen a concerning trend. The narrative is shifting again. There have been concerted efforts to downplay the scale of Stalin's purges. School textbooks have been rewritten to present Stalin in a more favorable light, framing him as a strong leader who industrialized the nation, with the terror being a necessary, if unfortunate, side effect of modernization. The work of independent historians and organizations like Memorial has faced immense pressure and obstacles. The very act of remembering has once again become a political battleground. Why does this matter today? Because suppressing history is not just about the past. It's about controlling the present and the future. When a society is not allowed to confront its darkest moments, it becomes vulnerable to repeating them. The individual stories of the millions who suffered, their hopes, their lives, their unjust ends, are not just statistics. They are a powerful warning against the dangers of absolute power, state-sponsored propaganda, and the silencing of dissent. Forgetting them is a disservice to their memory and a danger to ourselves. The fight to remember the victims of the Great Terror is a fight for historical truth and for a future where such atrocities can never happen again. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this topic important, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into history. See you next time.